Dude, it was called At Cafe, and they didn't know what the at symbol was.
Welcome to At Cafe, as in that little A with a circle around it.
I was actually bitter that I named it At Cafe. I had to explain to everybody, every reporter, every human, even people who came to work there, I had to explain what the at symbol was.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it?
At.
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around
I'd never heard it said.
And they're like, I get it, at the cafe. It's like, no, it's used in email. What's email?
This is Glenn McGinnis in July 2016, and this is Glenn McGinnis in July 1995. In January of 1995, Glenn and his co-founders, Nick Barnes and Chris Townsend, opened one of New York's first internet cafes, At Cafe. Their story isn't just about running a cafe, though it's definitely that.
It's fun to hang out. You can drink around your computer and not worry about it.
It's a window into how it felt to be around the internet, just as a mass audience was discovering the exhilaration and exhaustion of a new medium.
I'm terrified and excited.
And from the beginning, Glenn McGinnis knew one thing.
How fast it was going to hit and how it was going to be completely pervasive.
In the 1880s, St. Mark's Place was part of a German-American neighborhood called Kleindeutschland. 12 St. Mark's Place was home to the German-American Shooting Society Clubhouse. They came together to shoot, drink, and bowl. By the 1920s, it was a homeless shelter run by a guy who called himself Mr. Zero. He sheltered 1,000 people, who he affectionately called old bucks and lame ducks. And after that, the building continued to house legendary tenants.
We selected 12 St. Mark's Place. It was the old St. Mark's bookstore. And that has a really storied history with all sorts of amazing authors reading their work there. And so to me, it was very symbolic of internet, the new media, and I wanted to be there, and in that spot, it seemed so appropriate.
But convincing investors was harder. The idea was a really new one.
I lived overseas a lot as a kid. I was always obsessed with video games. I played Pong and they could not pry me off it. And in 1980, we moved to Tokyo. And it was like the Japanese were my people. I mean, they just adored computers and video games. In Asia, most of the video games were tabletop. So you'd sit, you could have coffee or whatever on the games, and they had coffee shops with these tabletop games. I thought of the internet cafe, probably because of the Tokyo experience with the tabletops.
Internet adoption was pretty low at the time. 6 months after At Cafe launched, just 14% of Americans were using the internet. How much more did the investors know?
Zero. They didn't know what it was. They'd never been online. It was Netscape 1.0. They could only think of it in terms of Hard Rock. That was it. It will be the Hard Rock Cafe, but with computers rather than rock and roll. I was determined to do this thing, so it was like, fine.
Well, the At Cafe, which is a cyber bar down in New York's East Village, is where we went to visit.
The At Cafe didn't have dial-up. Instead, they paid for a premium T1 connection, the type that universities and really large businesses had. It was much faster than dial-up modems, but that stability came at a hefty price.
The T1 cost $9,000 a month. I think my FiOS, which is 75 megabits synchronous, is $100, maybe $200. It's amazing how in 20 years.
The At Cafe had world-class internet connection for the time, and they personally negotiated to get it.
We basically, for Chris Townsend and myself, just created hell for ourselves. The pipes for the hot water and everything ran through the server room. We didn't know anything. We had no money to ask anybody, so there's no ventilation. And we had no money for air conditioning. So we made it a responsibility of the dishwasher to fill up a garbage can, a giant garbage can with ice from the ice maker and drag it into the server room. And that thing would melt to water every 2 hours. And that's how we cooled the server room, was with a friggin' thing of ice.
The excitement came from the idea itself, that people would want to go on the internet for fun, to connect.
If you go back and look, anyone can go right into the Internet Archive and look at what the websites looked like back then. I mean, it's friggin' hysterical. I mean, there was not a lot out there. And these pages were text, they weren't high bandwidth pages.
Despite the headaches, it still felt like the start of something.
Everyone is like waking up to the internet. I mean, you have to understand, no business had a website. Very idealistic, and then the corporation started to hit. And that's when they just came knocking at the door, and it was like they all wanted to do web launches because there was nowhere they could all put their homepage up on all the computers.
And a bevy of new websites signed up to have their launch parties at the @Cafe.
I was working nonstop.
They did events, they ran an ISP, and they continued to serve the weird culture of a still bohemian St. Mark's. Artists like Marc Yankus even made ads for them.
Everyone, college students, artists, East Village freaks, fiber optic, and his whole crew, when he got out of jail, he made that his hangout spot. He was there all the time.
That's fiber optic with a PH.
Today, 5 hackers were indicted on federal wire fraud charges.
When we changed the menu, he got bummed, and we saw less of him. But a lot of hackers were there, a lot of artists, a lot of students. It was an amazing mix of people. The media was all over it, and so people were coming from Japan specifically to see the cafe.
But despite all that, a little over a year later, in 1996, @Cafe closed down.
It was horrible from the beginning. We never ever broke even. It was the most stressful thing. It was very stressful.
It'd be simpler to say that people retreated from internet cafes to use the internet at home. And there were a lot of AOL CDs offering people free trials.
We had hundreds of AOL CDs at the cafe. I mean, just the amount of CDs was just ludicrous.
But the cafe closed for a lot of reasons. It was tough to make money with a T1 connection, but it's also just tough to run a restaurant in general. The internet wasn't the problem. The business was before its time.
It was so idealistic what we were doing, right? It was just to educate, and the internet would never be monetized.
The idea was really to create a physical space, to present virtual space, to really to extend the invitation to the public and say, here is the internet at its best.
Today, 12 St. Mark's Place is not a German shooting gallery, or a homeless shelter, or a bookshop, or an internet cafe. It's apartments, a yoga studio, and a Latin organic vegan restaurant. There's no shooting gallery, bowling alley, bookshop, or old bucks and lame ducks. But they do have one thing.
So I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the business there, just to check my information. Do you have internet there?
Yes.
Do you know how fast it is?
I don't know how fast it is. I know it's fast enough. Although our guests use it fine.
Glenn told me that video chat was actually really popular in the early days of the cafe, but the quality left something to be desired. This is what most video chats would have looked like using the See You, See Me software that was popular at the time.